Welcome to iRise Conversations with Joan. Welcome to iRise Conversations with Joan. My name is Joan, and I'm the award-winning author of the book iRise, The 10 Secrets to Getting Up When Life Knocks You Down. We all want happy, fulfilled lives based on what our own definition of success is. The problem is a lot of us don't have our own definitions and are living miserable lives based on other people's ideals and their opinions. There is no one way to happiness and success. There is only your way, the way that feels right to you, that brings you joy, and most importantly, where you can be your true authentic self. Today, we'll be discussing how you can be more authentic so that you can create the life that you truly love. Our guest today is Kamini Wood. She is the creator of Authentic
Kamini.
Oh, Kamini. Okay. Apologies.
Sorry.
Okay. Kamini Wood. She is the creator of AuthenticMe and the CEO of Live Joy Your Way, which is a coaching company helping high performers and overachievers who have seen success through old-rooted traditional metrics reestablish their relational self-awareness, which means she helps them understand how they think and what beliefs might be holding them back so that they can really come home to joy, fulfillment, and a newly defined definition of success driven internally rather than external validation. Welcome, Kamini, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Okay, so before we start talking about all things authentic, tell us a bit about your own journey. How did you get on this path?
Yes, thank you for asking me. I always start off by letting people know that it wasn't linear. I'm the non-traditional way of getting where I am. In all seriousness, I was on the path of just working in the business world. I was part of the .com industry. I was a certified project manager doing quote unquote all the things. I ended up running my husband's law practice for about 15 years. And in that process, actually started working with the employees around helping them understand what they wanted to achieve professionally. And I also would talk to them about their personal world. So I was building this knowledge base around just working one-on-one with people. Now, this also happened at the same time that I was going through my own self-transformation because I'm also a mom and I'm a mom to 5. So my middle child at the time, she started emulating these people-pleasing behaviors and this sort of putting everybody else in front of her. And I noticed it in her and I recognized that she was mirroring how I was showing up in the world. And that was my catalyst, right? So it was that catalyst moment where I recognized, oh my goodness, I have given so much of myself to everybody else. And I really am this people pleaser. I'm a perfectionist, and not in a judgmental way. It was in a way of recognizing if I didn't go through shifts and transformations, my children were going to repeat this. This was just going to be a generational repetition that was going to occur. So I did put in the time and effort into just understanding where those stories were coming from and why I was choosing to show up that way. After I went through that and sort of had those awakenings and those shifts and transformations, I recognized that I was meant to actually work with people one-on-one and take what I learned from a professional perspective and match that with what I went through from a personal perspective. Went ahead and trained, right? So got the professional training as well and brought all those things together to create a business that is centered around helping individuals recognize where they're holding themselves back so that they can live into their own human potential.
Wow. That's awesome. So your mission is to really help people really get to come to themselves, come back home, because it never really lives you. Like it's always there, but then you have all the stories that you were talking about, and we all start wearing masks and we don't show up how we truly want to show up.
Exactly.
Wow,
Exactly.
5 children. I'm going to have to ask, how do you juggle life?
So I say 5 children. I will be totally honest. They're not all little. My oldest is actually a 21-year-old, a professional ballerina. So she is dancing in upstate New York. And then I have an 18-year-old son who is playing Division I lacrosse. in Connecticut. And I have a 16-year-old, 13, and 9-year-old. So they're not all little.
Not
So
all
I
little.
don't
At
have to
some point
judge.
they were,
I don't have to judge.
at some point
They
they were
were
all
little
little
ones.
though.
Yeah, that's true. I won't diminish it. I'm gonna say it's not easy, but I've loved every minute. They're my why. I mean, point blank, my children are my why.
So let's talk about your brand, Authentic Me. What does that represent? What does it stand for?
Yeah. So that is the name that I came up with, the trademark that I came up with in terms of what it is that my business is standing around. And it's standing for the mission of helping people truly engage in their authentic self and owning it and saying, this is authentically me. This is who I am. And I am going to be unapologetic for it. So really for me, it is all about owning who you are and no longer dimming your light, just letting it shine.
Mm-hmm. So you did mention that you saw your child becoming a people pleaser, and that helped you recognize that she was just mirroring you. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of people, they might not have that trigger to realize that, okay, maybe I'm living out a life that's not authentically me. What are some of the telltale signs for people to really stop and recognize that, hey, what is this? This is not who I am.
That's a great question, because you're right. I mean, some of us don't have that catalyst moment where we have this situation or an experience where it's mirrored back to us. And what it comes down to is those moments where you feel like you are hiding pieces of yourself, or there is a lot of self-doubt. That could be an indication that something's lurking in the background, because self-doubt usually will come from a place of a false belief or a limiting belief of I'm not enough or I'm not good enough. And so those are those things to just be aware of is, how am I feeling? Do I feel constricted, or do I feel like I'm walking on eggshells or not truly getting to be myself, but instead I'm kind of walking it through life, kind of like wondering, is this decision okay? Is that okay? That would be an indication that maybe there is some people pleasing, or maybe there's some codependency, or maybe there's just this, like I said, the limiting belief of I'm not good enough. I have to prove my worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that, where in your personal life, it might be easier to recognize that, because just living life generally, you can kind of just figure out, okay, why am I hiding? But let's take it to the corporate scene a little bit. People generally don't necessarily believe that they need to show up as their true selves at work the same way they show up at home. And so how should people balance the two? Do you really show up to a corporate organization as your complete whole authentic self, or is it allowed for you to hide?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. I actually, that's a great point, because I do think there's parts of us that we don't want to show up and let the whole world see our vulnerable self, right? It's about recognizing, though, how we feel is how we show up. So if we're not fully honoring our authentic feelings and emotions, for instance, we're going to show up at work in that way that prohibits us from really truly living into what our potential is. So I'll just give you an example. I was just getting off of a call with a client who is recognizing that at work he was really struggling with showing up for his team members in a productive way. It was a lot of just roughness around how he was communicating, and he's feeling really bad about this. And what we really were able to uncover is, how he's feeling in everyday life is starting to that's how he's showing up at work. And so if we can be authentically ourselves, right, really owning for himself those emotions, recognize that they're data points, they have information, that's how he can then show up in this productive way at work. So being your authentic self at work doesn't mean I'm putting on display all my vulnerabilities. It's being authentically yourself for yourself, so that when you show up at work, you are able to show up in this productive manner. You're able to move yourself forward and you feel good about it.
Mm-hmm. I love that example, because I think for a lot of people, they think that being your authentic self at work means show up with all your vulnerabilities and all, and you don't have to. But I love how you tied it into your personal life, how you're feeling within your personal life. You really bring that to the corporate world as well, and that shows up, and then you're not able to show up for your team or your leaders or the organization. So it's about how you feel. Right? It's about really tapping into how you're feeling.
And owning those emotions. I think so many of us feel like, oh, if that's a bad emotion or negative emotion, so we run away from it. And what I always say to my clients when I'm working with them is, no, we're going to work on going towards it, because emotions are just data packets. They're just information on something that might be that we might need, right? It might be indicative of a need we have that's not being met. Sometimes those emotions are just letting us know that something in our environment isn't aligned with our values, or something that we're experiencing isn't aligned with our values. And so again, we can then use that information to figure out what actions we want to take to move ourselves forward.
I like that. So kind of separating yourself from the emotion. So the emotion is just a data point, it's just informing you about something that you need to do. But a lot of us, we get consumed by it, and you decide that that's who you are. And then it has to impact every other area of your life.
Okay. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So would you say, and this is probably a subjective question, do you believe that most people are living in their authenticity, or not so much?
I think a lot of us, and I don't want to make a big generalization, but I do think a lot of us are living in with masks on, as you referred to earlier, because there's so many pressures. There's cultural pressures, societal pressures, familial pressures. We have our own personality that creates a pressure. And so when we think about it, a lot of us are trying to balance that. And until we're able to find ways to relinquish the attachment to those external validations, we continually try to live up to somebody's perception of us. And so in order to move towards that real authentic self, it's about releasing that. And it's also to recognize, as humans, we're going to ebb and flow. So maybe one day we find ourselves caught up in living to the external validation. And it's not about saying, oh my gosh, I have made no progress, I'm just, all for naught. It's like, no, it's one day, and we're human, and we're not trying, this work in and of itself is not trying to make us immune to the fact that we might be pushed by a challenge into that place again. It's just a different layer, and we show up differently, though. We show up with more tools, and we're able to meet it and get back to center in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that external validation, I think, is something that we learned. Society, culture, growing up, family, teachers, whatever, we were all conditioned to get validation. That's how you know you're doing the right thing. So we constantly seek the validation. And I think that ties back to what you were talking about, self-doubt, imposter syndrome. We don't feel like we're enough. And so constantly looking for that validation. But I really do love what you said, that sometimes we might fall back into that way of living because we're human, right? And sometimes you really need that external validation just to get through the day. But just realize that it's just today, it's just one day, and tomorrow let's try to get back to your center, that true authenticity that we all crave. So let's talk a little bit about self-awareness, because I know that with every journey in life, we always go back to, it starts with self. It starts with self. I mean, we're like, self, I already know me. so what is self-awareness, and how can people become more self-aware?
Yeah, self-awareness, for me, at least from my perspective, it's being in tune with not just your values, but with your beliefs and with your needs, right? Those are your three pillars: values, beliefs, and needs. That allows us to truly understand who we are as individuals. And it's recognizing that we're not going to be carbon copies, and we're not meant to be carbon copies of each other, right? And so with that understanding of self, from that place, we can then start making choices that are aligned with who we are and who we want to become. And so that's why self-awareness is so important, because it's understanding from a very compassionate place, not a judgmental place. This is who I am. This is what I need. And engaging in relationships from that place.
Yeah. When you mentioned judgmental, I think that that's where a lot of people get stuck. The fact that, or the reality that if I become more self-aware, then it's like, I'm good, I'm a bad person, I'm not good. So it goes back to, so I think really looking at it from a judgment-free zone, I think that's the key. Yeah. So it's not to judge you, it's just to be aware, so that you can always come back to that center and really make the right decisions for your life. Because if you're not aware, then you're just cruising. You don't even know what you're doing. You're just, going all the place people are telling you go left, go right. You're really not in control of yourself. So you do self-aware. But I love that. And I think everyone should make a note of that. Being self-aware it's without judgment. It's judgment-free.
It absolutely. And,
Yes.
one of the things that I will say routinely is awareness is the doorway to change.
Mm.
So self-awareness allows us to grow and evolve,
Mhm.
because when we're self-aware, we're learning from that place of curiosity, from that place of compassion. Then we can decide what actions, what committed actions we want to take to continue our journey in our evolving self.
Mhm. And I think, just talking about compassion, I don't think we as humans, I don't know if it's a human flaw, but we're not very compassionate to ourselves. We're
Not at
our
all.
own biggest critic. Is like, how
Yes.
could you? You're so dumb. You're so
Yeah.
things that we would
Yeah.
never say to anyone else.
Yep.
We constantly say it to
Absolutely.
ourselves.
Yep.
And I think that negative self-talk, that voice is just constantly there. How can people really start to shift away from that and not let that drive all of the decisions that they're making in their lives?
That's such a tough one. And I think it's because one of the lies we tell ourselves is that, oh, it's that critical voice that helps me achieve all the things I'm achieving. Right. The critical voice is the one that pushes me really hard and gets me to do those things. That's just a lie we tell ourselves. So really it's recognizing, first of all, that that's the lie we tell ourselves. So really what we're doing is we're giving ourselves this, maybe it pushes us for a little while, but it's going to make us plateau, because at some point that criticism starts to cut us down, right? We start to, the self-doubt gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually we're going to plateau. So that judgy voice that we've trained ourselves is the one that like pushes us forward. First of all, we have to name that. The second thing is recognizing and noticing when we are criticizing ourselves, when we are allowing the inner critic to take over, and paying attention to what he or she is saying, and really go into that third person, like, oh my gosh, I hear her. Wow. And say it out loud. Because sometimes what we have to do is we have to hear it with our own ears, and we can actually recognize, like, wow, she's super mean, or he's super mean. Because like you said, we would never say that to somebody else. So what happens is our inner critic is just, we're in our own head. We're just thinking about it. But if we can say it out loud and we actually witness it, we recognize how mean that is. And we are able to interrupt it in that moment and shift it and be like, you know what? Yeah, that's like, for instance, I will catch myself as a mom. God, you're the worst mom ever. Now I say it out loud. I'm like, well, hold on a minute. Hold on. No, my kids are all safe.
Yeah.
They're all healthy. They're all doing okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. Right. So because what happens is we hear it and then we can start to challenge it and ask, like, what's really true here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that. And I think that's a good practice. Say it out loud and just listen to yourself. It really, really mean that inner critic really can be really, really mean and can really, really weigh you down and really diminish your self-confidence. Like, who are you? Who do you think you are to do that? You're no good. Look at that. You just did that. It always told you were crap anyway. You have like it can really, really kill self-confidence and self-doubt. And I think that's one area that a lot of people struggle with. Even like I know you work with overachievers and high performers, but even within that space, a lot of them still go through a lot of self-doubt. Oh, am I going to be good enough for that position? Should I apply? And then the voices are like, no, you're not.
Totally.
Remember last week when you messed up on this?
Yes.
So how can people who know, like, because it's not, no one's immune to this stuff. Like you could be the highest achiever out there, and then situations will come up and you start doubting yourself. So what are some of the tips for overachievers, high performance to really stay grounded in their confidence and move forward without that self-doubt or ignoring that negative self-talk?
And you're absolutely right. I think even with the high achievers who've performed and they've achieved much, they still have the same self-doubt. And it goes back to what we were sort of just talking about in terms of recognizing the thoughts. So like with the inner critic, we're actually saying it out loud. With the self-doubt, it's also coming down to, oh, I'm having the thought that I'm not good at this thing. And it's almost this form of diffusion where we actually separate ourselves from the thought. So the thought becomes outside of ourselves, where we're recognizing that it's just a thought that we're not good enough, or there's a thought that I might fail at this thing. And now, because it's not me, it's a thought, I then can challenge it. And I can say, well, okay, what's actually true? Well, what's true is I have my value of determination, and I have my value of hard work, and I have my strength of showing up. And we go through our values, we go through our strengths. And it's like, okay, so what's actually true is I'm going to try this. And even if I fail, I'm going to be okay, because I've been okay every other time. right? So
Yeah.
we have to, the very first step is to separate ourselves from the thought.
Mm. Yeah. And I think it all comes back to that whole being self-aware and really doing the work. Because if you haven't done the work to really figure out what are your values, what are your strengths, what are your skills, who are you?
Yeah.
Probably just, oh, I don't know if I've done this before. I'm not even sure of who I am. I don't know my values. I don't know anything. And then the voice gets louder. I'm like, I told you.
I told you don't know yourself. Yeah, I told you can't do this.
So I love that. Really separate yourself from the thought and really look at what is true. Look back at all your experiences, all the things that you've done. What is true about who I truly am? What are my values? What are the things that have kept me being an overachiever? And then really be honest and tell yourself the truth in the situation. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. Go away.
We have thousands of them a day.
I know, right?
Which ones am I going to actually put my energy into?
Believe in every single one. It's exhausting. Exhausting. Okay. So let's talk relationships for a minute, because I know you also do some relationship coaching. Relationships, I think for me, they can make or break people, every area of your life. And for some of us, or for a lot of people, the way we were raised is, relationships, you can't change them. It is what it is. They're your family or they're your friends. You grew up with these people. And we're not really able to recognize when a relationship is toxic or impacting our lives. And again, when it impacts your life, it impacts every area of your life. So forget your personal life. It impacts your job, it impacts success. Everything that you're doing impacts your health as well. So how can people identify toxic relationships, and what will be the best way to make, if you can't get rid of it completely, at least detach to the point where it's not impacting other areas of your life?
Yeah. So especially with people who are highly sensitive, or people who are givers, pleasers, overachievers, because again, we don't want to fail at anything, right? So we're going to keep working at that relationship, even if it's not healthy. It's really important to pay attention to the signs of a toxic or an unhealthy relationship. And so a lot of times what we say to look for are those moments where you might be dimming yourself down, or maybe you find yourself walking on eggshells around the person. So for instance, you feel like you want to share something, but there's a fear of, oh, I really can't because it's going to cause a big conflict, or there's a lack of emotional safety, right? And that's a big one. When you start to feel that lack of emotional safety with the person that you're in a relationship with, and so it's not just romantic, this is familial, workplace, friendships, the same things happen, right? It's recognizing, wow, if I don't feel emotionally safe, then this is not healthy for me. Because one of the key elements to feeling authentically yourself is being able to have your, recognize what your emotions are, feeling at home within yourself. And if you're not feeling emotionally safe, you're not feeling at home with yourself. There's this element of something bad's going to happen, right? In that nervous feeling. So when those feelings start popping up, or those red flags, if you will, start popping up, you're not really being able to show up as your true self. You're finding yourself dimming yourself. Those are those moments to sort of take a step back and ask yourself, is this a relationship that I need to continue being in? Or if you can't, because a lot of family relationships, we can't just pick up and leave. It's boundaries. It's all about boundaries. What boundaries do I need to set in order to protect my own energetic field as well as my own being? And a lot of times, and it's very important to understand that boundaries don't mean walls. It doesn't mean that I'm erecting a wall and I'm never going to speak to this person. The best metaphor I have for boundaries, or healthy boundaries, that is like you're building a fence, right? And you can open and close the fence, the door to the fence, and let people in as you choose and please. You can talk through it, you can see through it. But it allows this idea of this is me and that's you. And I get to choose what I allow in and what I don't. And when you're in an unhealthy relationship, it's important to start setting those. What's okay for me and what's not okay. And the very first step is to get clear for yourself what's okay and what's not okay. And then the next step is start communicating it and being very aware that when you haven't had boundaries with somebody in the past and you start setting boundaries with them, it's not a cakewalk, right? Because they have definitely benefited from your lack of boundaries, right? So they're going to be like, what is this? I don't want
what is this?
No,
I've always had full access. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just being ready. So that's why it's really important to do the work with yourself first, really coming to terms with knowing what's okay for you and what's not okay, because then you can stand in your own power as you're communicating it, because there's going to be a little bit of that pushback.
Oh, I like that. I love the analogy of the fence. You can still see through, you can still talk through, but make sure you separate them from you, because again, for this work to really work, for you to really be your authentic self and live your true life, the life that you truly love, you've got to be honest with yourself. You have to know what you want. You have to create boundaries. You really have to protect your energy. Yeah, it's very, very key. Okay, awesome. So tell us a little bit about your coaching, because I know that it's almost like you do everything and you help everyone, which is great. I love that. So tell us a bit about your coaching. Yeah. Who are the clients that you work with?
So I know it sounds like I do everything, but really what I say is that it's all about helping people live into their own human potential. And what that really means is helping them understand that relationship with themselves. And the reason why it feels like it's everything is because that relationship is a foundation for every other thing that we involve ourselves in. Yep. So the people that I end up really working with, I work one-on-one. Most of my clients are these high achievers who might have an element of perfectionism there. That's not to say all of them are that way, but most of them are. And really what it is, that connective through line with everybody is they feel stagnant or stuck from holding themselves back from whatever false belief or limiting belief might be there. So a lot of the work is around letting go of the I'm not good enough or I'm unworthy, the imposter syndrome, because a lot of that is that relationship with self. And so from there, I coach, I say life coach, but it's about life is all things, right? So we can touch on relationships. We can touch on our professional world. We can touch on health and wellness, because it affects everything. So ultimately for me, my coaching is all centered around that relationship with self, getting that so strong and understanding oneself. And from there, just expanding into all the areas that they want to take that into.
No, I love that. Again, it's back to self. It's all about self. Yes. Your relationship with self, that really drives every area of your life. We really can't escape that. And I think that's really the key of the work that you do, really help people get clear on what that is and really solidify their authentic selves. Okay, but I also know that you do parenting coaching. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that. What does that look like?
You're going to laugh, because the way that I approach parenting coaching is around recognizing that as a parent, how we show up, we have to understand ourselves. Because what happens as parents, if we really were to quickly sort of unpack it, a lot of times when we are struggling as a parent, it's because we are projecting our own fears or our own unprocessed stories and narratives. So the work that I do with my parent clients is helping them see what their narratives are, what their stories are, and allowing them to start processing through that through the coaching, so that when they're showing up with their child, there is that separation of they're their own human, right? Your children are their own human being. They're creating this life. Our children don't belong to us, right? We have the benefit and the privilege of helping them cultivate who they're going to be. And if we can really come home to that thought, we then show up in a totally different way for our children.
Oh my God. Like I know a million people who probably, what you just said is like, whoa, because that's what really happens. Parents try to project their own stories, their own narratives on the kids. And that's not correct. They're their own self as well. So separating the two, I think, is so key. But for a lot of new parents, it's like, no, they're a part of me. They're just an extension of me. So I think that's really great. I've never met anyone who does parenting coaching, that type of coaching, at least the way you do it. And I think that a lot of parents will probably, especially new parents, will really benefit from that. And you have 5.
Yeah. So. And you're right. Because I think a lot of times people hear parent coaching and they think, oh, this person will help me figure out how to discipline my child or
Exactly.
And what happens is that comes naturally when you understand yourself and your stories and how that might be being projected onto your kids, right?
Yeah, I think that's phenomenal. Wow, awesome. So the last thing I really want to touch on is because, like I've worked in the corporate world a lot, and we talked about people feeling stuck and really not being able to move forward. I know a lot of phenomenal people who are really great at their jobs, but really just they can't get to that next level. They can't get those leadership roles that they're looking for. And so some people don't even apply at all. So that's different. But for people who really desire it, people who may be listening today who are stuck, they just can't break through that ceiling. What advice would you have for them? What type of coaching do you do for leaders, for people who want to become leaders in their organizations?
Yeah, so I do work with a lot of individuals on how to become or move into those leadership roles. And one of the things that we will unpack together is, it's really important to recognize what are those limiting beliefs? What is that narrative that we're telling ourselves? Because like you said, some people won't even apply. I get curious with that. It's like, well, what's the story? What's the obstacle with putting that application in? Because if we can start bringing that to the awareness, now we can start tracking it back to where does that story come from? And now we get to rewrite that. Because really, we have a choice whether we're going to continue writing the same narrative or whether we're willing to shift the narrative. It's just like when we look at something from our past, we can always look at it with a different lens. And truth be told, that's generally what happens. We'll bring up a memory, and every time we have a memory about something, it's got a little tweak to it. Right? We don't really remember it exactly the same. So why can't we apply that same thing to the thoughts or the false beliefs that are holding us back? So with leaders or with people who want to step into those leadership roles, it's so important to slow down and take a look at what is the story that's being said first. And from that place, break it down into what's true, what actions are you going to take, and moving forward from there.
Wow, I love that. And I really want to encourage everyone who's wanting to go into a leadership role. If you're struggling or you can't do this on your own, well, now you have a coach that can help you achieve that. And again, it all comes back to self. It comes back to your limiting beliefs, the stories, the narratives, all of the conditioning, all the things, all the belief systems that are holding you back. And until we all deal with that, it's really hard to move forward and really have the joyous life that we all want, filled with fulfillment and joy. And you can't really truly show up as your authentic self. So you have to do the inner work. You have to really go back to, where is this story coming from? Why do I feel unworthy? Why do I feel anxious? Why do I feel like I'm not good enough? There's always a story. You just need to unpack it and really, like you said, open that door so that you can step into your true authenticity. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So what final words of wisdom do you have for our listeners today as we step into 2023?
As we step into 2023, I would love to encourage people to recognize that life is not achieved. Life is lived.
Ooh, I love that. Wow. Wow, that's a big one. I love that. Nothing more to add. I think that is not achieved. Life is lived. I think if people can embrace that more, then people will actually live life and not just wake up and pass through.
It's moving out of I'm doing into I'm living.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll be sure to put your link so that people who want to sign up for life coaching, well, she says life coaching, but it's more about self, your relationship with yourself, so that you can really thrive in every other area of your life. You want to be a leader, you want to figure out how to do good parenting, then you can reach out. It will help you. It will help everyone around you. And like we said, the goal is really to live that fulfilled, joyous life that we all deep down inside desire and we all deserve.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you to all the listeners. And I will see you same time next week on iRise Conversations with Joan. Thanks for listening.